So, John, what can you tell us about some of these judges?
Shannon, good morning to you. The president is beginning what will be a long process to try to reshape the federal court system. This is at the level below the Supreme Court. This is the Circuit Court of Appeals, the district courts, also federal claim courts. Yesterday, naming 5 nominees to the Circuit Courts of Appeal, as well as 4 district judges and 1 to the Federal Claims Court. 2 of the judges, Joan Larson, who's been nominated to the 6th Circuit Court of Appeals, and David Strauss to the 8th Circuit, were on the president's list of possible replacements for Judge Antonin Scalia. Senate Democrats immediately staking out a position that will likely be reflected in confirmation hearings. The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer saying, quote, with this first slate of lower court nominees, it seems that the president is intent on continuing to outsource the judicial selection process to hard-right special interest groups rather than consulting with senators on a bipartisan basis. The White House, though, believes that these are people who are eminently qualified for this position. And in terms of the president putting his stamp on the federal court system, he does have a real opportunity to do it. There are still 110 vacancies that he has to fill out of a total of about 800 federal judgeships. So, if you can get maybe, 12, 14% of judges in, and they're your people, you can really have an impact on the court, Shannon.
Absolutely, and it lasts long beyond the presidency. So how's the White House, by the way, reacting to yesterday's hearing with former acting Attorney General Sally Yates?
We had that hearing yesterday at the Judiciary Committee with Sally Yates, the former acting attorney general, left over from the Obama administration, as well as the former director of national intelligence, James Clapper. Some of the stories this morning, most of them, in fact, are focusing on this idea that the president was warned multiple times not to take on Lieutenant General Michael Flynn as the national security advisor, but the White House and the president in particular looking at the story from a different angle. The president saying that the coverage should be about how Flynn's name was leaked to the Washington Post. The president tweeting out after that hearing, quote, ask Sally Yates under oath if she knows how classified information got into the newspaper soon after she explained it to the White House counsel. You remember Sally Yates' telephone, Don McGahn, the White House counsel, and said, I think you got a problem here with Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. The president also tweeting, quote, biggest story today between Clapper and Yates is on surveillance. Why doesn't the media report on this? Hashtag fake news. The Judiciary Committee Chairman, Chuck Grassley, yesterday drilled down on the issue of the unmasking of Trump officials who were caught up in surveillance. Former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper said he had asked for the identity of one Trump official to be unmasked, and both Clapper and Yates said they had seen the names of unmasked individuals. Watch this exchange.
Did either of you ever review classified documents in which Mr. Trump, his associates, or members of Congress had been unmasked?
Oh, yes.
You have. Can you give us details here?
No, I can't.
Ms. Yates, have you?
Yes, I have, and no, I can't give you details.
The president also pointed out that neither Yates nor Clapper offered any evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia to influence the election. The president tweeting, quote, Director Clapper reiterated what everybody, including the fake media, already knows. There is, quote, no evidence of collusion with Russia and Trump. If the hearing yesterday was damaging to anyone, it was probably Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. But, Shannon, it's unlikely that we will hear from him in any kind of a congressional testimony setting unless he is granted immunity. You remember a number of weeks ago, his attorney floated that idea, but as far as I know, no one's taken him up on it just yet.
Yeah, lots of chatter, but nothing a done deal yet. All right, John Roberts, the White House, thank you.
Sally Yates says that she bluntly warned the White House about hiring former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Remember, this is the early days, the early hours of this administration. Her testimony leaves plenty of unanswered questions, and my next guest writes this today in the Washington Examiner. 5 big things we still don't know about Sally Yates' testimony. That writer's Byron York, chief political correspondent, Washington Examiner, and Fox News contributor. Byron, good morning to you. Your essential question, right? What did Flynn do? Are we any closer to that answer?
No. I mean, after all the talk we have yesterday, we still don't know what it was originally that Michael Flynn did that set off all of this concern. Sally Yates testified that she went to the White House and she explained to the White House counsel of Flynn's, quote, underlying conduct that was problematic in and of itself. But what was it? she wouldn't say. Now, a lot of the talk among senators and others is that it was simply the act of Flynn talking to the Russian ambassador during the transition and talking about sanctions to the Russian ambassador. We do know, or think we know, that Flynn did lie about that inside the White House. He told Vice President Pence that he didn't do it. So that's clearly an issue. But this underlying conduct, what was it that was so problematic that made Flynn vulnerable to blackmail, as Sally Yates said? Still don't know.
Yeah, was it sanctions? Was it money? Was it neither?
Well, we don't know
because today we are guessing, Byron.
Exactly. She explained that her knowledge of that is based in classified information, and therefore she could not discuss it.
All right, so this is what she said about why she went to the president and suggested Flynn not be brought on. Watch here.
Logic would tell you that you don't want the national security advisor to be in a position where the Russians have leverage over him. Now, in terms of what impact that may have had or could have had, I can't speak to that. But we knew that that was not a good situation, which is why we wanted to let the White House know about it.
Okay, fair. I think it's a fair comment there. We can all agree on that. But he was fired. And whether it took 18 minutes or 18 days, Byron, he was out.
Well, it could have been there was a disagreement between the White House and Sally Yates about the severity, the importance of that underlying conduct. There are a lot of people, Republicans, former officials like Stephen Hadley, who used to be the national security advisor for George W. Bush, who say there's nothing wrong with an incoming national security advisor to talk to the Russian ambassador, and in the context of what was happening in December, to talk about sanctions to the Russian ambassador. So you almost get the idea that Flynn may have lied about innocent conduct, which raises a real question mark. You think, well, why did he do that? But it's clear that he didn't tell the truth to White House officials, and that's the reason they gave for firing him. But what actually was the conduct at the bottom of all this? Still unclear.
I'd back up 3 years. I mean, context of the relationship is very important. He was fired by President Obama.
Yes.
And he went public against President Obama's policies, right? He was an early disciple of Donald Trump as a candidate. He spoke on night number one at the Republican convention in Cleveland, Ohio. I mean, these guys were close. They were tight, Byron.
The president clearly valued Flynn's loyalty. Remember, Donald Trump didn't have that many big-time people endorsing him. You know, Jeff Sessions, for a long time, was the only senator to endorse Trump for months and months and months. And Michael Flynn had been the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. He had been at the very top of the military intelligence establishment in Washington. And he was very valuable to Donald Trump, both as an advisor and as a display that Trump could actually attract top-level support. So once Trump won, Flynn was going to get a big job because of that loyalty.
Last thing, can you wrap this up as to where it goes? Or do we know?
Well, what we have to do, I think, is declassify some of this information. We saw that the chairman of the subcommittee, Senator Lindsey Graham, said to Yates yesterday, you need to explain some of this stuff to us, the senators, in a classified setting. The bigger issue is they need to explain some of that stuff to the American people in a non-classified setting. So for this ever to be actually resolved, the public has to know a little bit more about what went on.
And that's why you wrote the piece. Thank you, Byron. Byron, you're
Thank you, Bill.
Washington, D.C. John Roberts mentioned immunity. Remember the day that came up with Jason Chaffetz was sitting right over there, said there's no justification for immunity right now. I don't know if things have changed 2 months later. Maybe they have not, but we will watch.
Yeah, it's still unanswered, the questions about who leaked the information to the Washington Post.
Big deal.
Didn't get to the bottom of that yesterday either, but we'll stay on it. Well, Sally Yates also getting grilled over the decision that cost her job, her refusal to enforce President Trump's original travel ban.
Telling you what I'm getting at, and I don't mean any disrespect. Who appointed you to the United States Supreme Court?
So was Yates justified in willfully ignoring that order? Former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee is next on that.
Fox News alert this morning. President Trump may be set for a shift in policy in the war in Afghanistan. Details on new reports of a possible troop surge and what that might mean for the ongoing war on terror in that country.
And police say this man terrorized an entire city for more than a year. Now the suspect, wanted for 9 murders, is finally in police custody.
Right now, the suspect certainly would be the only one who knows the motive for sure, and the evidence hasn't yet pointed us to a motive, but we're continuing to investigate.
Fox brings you the latest breaking news and business headlines from around the world. If you have a story idea for us, email us at foxaroundtheworld@foxnews.com. Keep it here.
After terrorizing the Phoenix area for months, a suspected serial killer is finally in custody, wanted for at least 9 murders. 23-year-old Aaron Saucedo now faces nearly 36 charges involving several street shootings between March and July of last year. Officials say they believe he acted alone.
At this point, no evidence has indicated to us that there are any associates involved in this case. The evidence that we continue to discover daily continues to point back to one suspect.
We are told most of Saucedo's victims were likely picked at random, except for one, a man who was dating Saucedo's mother.
I believed that any argument that we would have to make in its defense would not be grounded in the truth. Because to make an argument in its defense, we would have to argue that the executive order had nothing to do with religion, that it was not done with an intent to discriminate against Muslims.
Do you believe it's constitutional or unconstitutional?
I was not convinced that it was constitutional.
I don't mean any disrespect. Who appointed you to the United States Supreme Court?
I was appointed.
That determined, isn't it a court of final jurisdiction decides what's constitutional and not?
So there you have a back and forth with Sally Yates yesterday and Senator Kennedy on why she refused to defend the controversial travel ban. Yates says President Trump's past comments played a part, and apparently some of the judges did too in the arguments. Mike Huckabee, former governor of Arkansas and a Fox News contributor with me now. How are you, sir? Good day to you.
Good day, Bill.
Who appointed you to the Supreme Court?
Nobody appointed me, but I'll tell you, nobody appointed Sally Yates either.
What did you think of that exchange?
It was the line of the day, and it was from a freshman senator, just getting there. And I thought Senator Kennedy absolutely nailed the argument. It is not her job as the acting attorney general to make a decision about the constitutionality. And if she thinks something is not constitutional, then she should have the integrity to resign. She does not have the integrity to say to her boss, I don't agree with it, and I'm not going to do it.
Why do you think she acted that way? Why do you think she made that decision? And bear in mind, she was fired a few days later.
And she should have been. She should have been fired. But the reason she acted that way was because she was a holdover from the Obama administration. She did not support Donald Trump, didn't agree with him, didn't like him. And I think that was very evident. There was an arrogance about her whole attitude of, I don't like that order, and I'm not going to follow it.
So you think this was politics?
Total politics. But if it wasn't politics, if it was principle, then do the right thing, stand up and resign. Resignation is principle. Defiance is politics.
I still don't understand why this has not been characterized, not as a Muslim ban or religious ban, but why is it not a ban on failed states? I mean, look at it. Yeah. Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, Yemen. You could argue 5 of the 6 don't have a functioning government. Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen are all failed states.
Failed states, and it wasn't on a permanent ban. It was a 3-month hold. So it wasn't like somebody who was an American citizen was not going to get to come back home. It was someone who was not an American citizen was going to be put on hold until they were vetted. Look, nobody has a right to come to the U.S. on their terms. They come to the U.S. if they're a foreign national on our terms, because it's our country. That shouldn't be hard for even the crazy Ninth Circuit to understand, but they don't seem to get it because, Bill, this was political.
Well,
it wasn't about
Ninth
policy.
Circuit's going to be back in the picture soon.
Of course they will.
The Fourth Circuit was in action yesterday.
Yes.
We have an audio clip of part of this argument. This is the Solicitor General Jeffrey Wall arguing on behalf of the government. He was challenged by, I've got it right here, he was challenged by the judge, Robert King, on this exchange as to what the president has said with words in the past. Watch.
He's never repudiated what he said about the Muslim ban. It's still on his website. The district court here found that it's on his website, campaign website, today. or as of the day that he wrote the opinion.
Judge King, it is an archived press statement from 16 months ago, before we got into a campaign and we had a primary and an election and we took an oath and we formed a government.
Again, what he as a candidate said, is that germane? Can you fight or argue that in a legal sense?
No. I mean, good heavens. If people were going to be adjudicated on the basis of everything they said in the campaign, nobody could hold office, because people say stuff in campaigns that they know they can't hold up to. That's nonsense.
I've seen you out there. I think I think your words would hold up. I try to always
say it straight, but not everybody does, and a lot of people say things even as a candidate, and then when they get into office and they find out that maybe what they said isn't as practical as they thought it was when they were a candidate. The point being, it doesn't matter whether you agree with the policy that Trump had. The only question, and I think Alan Dershowitz has been brilliant about this, and he's no Republican, but he said, this is not a policy question. This is a legal question. And does the president have the constitutional authority to make the policy decision? And the answer is absolutely, unequivocally yes.
On that point, Judge Dennis Shedd, in the same argument, said, is the executive not entitled to some deference?
It's not deference, it's responsibility, it's authority. He's been given that in the Constitution, and it can't be taken away because somebody disagrees with the policy. There were a lot of policies that many of us disagreed with President Obama, but if he's the president, he gets to make certain decisions because he's been elected, sworn in, and that's the way this works.
Lastly, the Supreme Court's fully stocked now, 9 justices. Do they win the administration?
I think they absolutely. This is going to go to the Supreme Court, and I think it's going to be a slam dunk. And I don't
slam dunk.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be even a 5-4 decision. I think it's going to be closer to 7-2. Because again, how do they not? If they're going to look at the Constitution, how can they say they're going to start interpreting what a person said as a candidate as the basis for a constitutional question? That's dangerous ground, and even liberals on the Supreme Court surely don't want to set that as a precedent.
Nice to see you in New York.
Good to see you, Bill.
Good to see you out of Florida.
Yeah.
Governor Mike Huckabee. There he is in person. Thank you.
Good to see you.
What's next?
Well, this is a Fox News Alert. New satellite images uncover some mysterious North Korean islands, apparently man-made. Islands that could be used to launch missiles. Are they a risk to the U.S. mainland or our allies in the Pacific? Ambassador John Bolton is here to weigh in. Plus, this.
I mean, if you haven't figured it out, all the action's at the airport in America these days. This is in South Florida, why the airline is blaming its own pilots for this melee. We'll take you there. Wow.
When news breaks, he has the smart breakdown. First, fair and balanced. Shepard Smith, the accurate story and truthful reporting, only on Fox News Channel.
Non-digital technologies, which had sort of been written off for dead, continue to grow over the past 10 years. And it seems though it's almost a movement now across consumer groups, across economies, and globally. It speaks to that deeper need for people to connect with real things and real experiences that aren't necessarily coming out of your smartphone.
Author David Sachs calls the movement the revenge of analog.
Vinyl records is sort of the best known example of this, and it's been the most dramatic one. Vinyl records went from their low point of sales in 2009, when there was less than 1 million new records sold and pressed in the U.S., to last year, where there's going to be probably something around 17, 18 million records.
And how we take pictures also mirrors a shift away from digital.
The industry, companies like Kodak, were absolutely decimated, and yet there's been really interesting growth in the past few years in demand for film photography, especially instant film. It's grown tremendously, especially among younger consumers, teens, tweens, kids even, who are buying these cameras for the first time, not out of any sense of nostalgia, but because it's something new, it's something different.
Interest in board games has surged as well.
Even though we can all play video games on our phones or our computers, linked up with multiple players around the world, and it's incredibly powerful and the graphics are incredible, there is a growing desire for that real special interaction that comes with sitting around a table with friends, playing a board game.
And even bookstores have benefited from the desire for real interaction.
What's been interesting is that over the past several years, not only bookstores have been growing in America, but independently owned bookstores. Initially, we sort of gave in to the convenience of, oh, great, Amazon could ship everything to my door. That's fantastic. We don't need bookstores. And only after living without them do we say, we may not need them, but we actually want them, right? We require them in a different way.
Analog seems to be here to stay.
People say these days, oh, we're living in a digital world, and there's no sense fighting it. But I think that's false. We're not living in a digital world. We are human beings on the earth spinning through space, right? And as long as that is true, we're going to gravitate and respond to real things, real tactile, real world experiences in ways that is richer and deeper than what the digital world can offer.
So whether it's entertainment, food, or travel, people apparently still want and desire experiences they can't find in the digital world. In New York, Laura Engel, Fox News.
Mysterious man-made islands have been discovered off North Korea's coast. New satellite images suggest those islands are equipped with military installations and could be used for launching missiles. John Bolton is a former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and a Fox News contributor. Ambassador, good to see you this morning.
Good morning.
We'll get to that discussion, but there is news out of the South Korean elections this morning. It looks like the candidate that we think is going to win, Moon Jae-in, and is described as somebody who has called for engagement with North Korea, saying that the hardline approach favored by conservatives is something that's done nothing to prevent the North from expanding its nuclear bomb and missile programs and has reduced South Korea's voice in international efforts. If that's our winner, what does it mean?
Well, it means essentially a return to what was once called the sunshine policy of two of his predecessors, Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun, who were in office during much of the George W. Bush administration. This was sadly entirely predictable, this outcome, since President Park ran into her troubles and headed toward impeachment. Moon only gets, according to exit polls, about 40% of the vote. But nonetheless, under the South Korean system, he'll win. And I think we're right back to where we were 10 years ago. And I think it means that efforts to pressure North Korea or to pressure China to pressure North Korea are going to fail, because Moon will possibly reopen the Kaesong industrial complex, provide subsidies to North Korea. He'll probably go meet with Kim Jong-un and give him international political legitimacy. It's just a Groundhog Day, unfortunately.
All right. So in the meantime, we're getting word about these satellite images picking up these man-made islands that appear they've been under construction for at least 5 years. Are they taking a page out of China's book and building these islands and thinking, we're just going to go ahead and do it. Nobody's stopping us. It gives us other advantages. Some say it's for military purposes. Some speculate maybe it's agricultural. Everybody seems to agree it's probably not in our interest.
Yeah, well, I don't think anything North Korea does is in the interest of the United States. I really can't say what this construction is about. North Korea has plenty of missile launch sites already. It could be additional fortifications. But I think the point here is that kind of across the board, North Korea does not feel constrained. If there's evidence that Chinese pressure on the North has increased, I don't think it's really visible yet. I don't think you can confirm it. And in any event, I just think 25 years of putting pressure on the North or trying to deal with them diplomatically has failed. And I don't see why year 26 is any more likely to succeed. I think you need a fundamental redirection of our effort against the North Korean nuclear weapons program, or as time goes by, inexorably, day by day, as they get closer to the capacity to hit the United States, the risk of a military response rises, unfortunately.
And really quickly, I want to ask you about this so-called provocation out of Iran, the test of a high-speed torpedo, and it's really the location that concerns a lot of people. We're talking about the Strait of Hormuz, of course, critical to oil trade worldwide.
Well, it's been in the Iranian playbook for a long time that if they ran into difficulty because of our concern for their nuclear weapons program or their support for international terrorism, they would threaten to close the Strait of Hormuz, which carries an awful lot of oil out of Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, out into international commerce. And the Strait of Hormuz is pretty narrow. The Persian Gulf itself is pretty narrow when you look at the actual shipping lanes. So this is another provocative gesture by the Ayatollahs. This is another piece of evidence that the Iran nuclear deal has failed to have any impact on their behavior. Comes just before their presidential election in the next couple weeks. And I think it's a signal that whatever the outcome of that presidential election really won't change Iranian policy, but it's going to highlight another challenge for the Trump administration internationally.
And there are many out there. Ambassador Bolton, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Shannon.
Certainly are. President Trump, meanwhile, putting pressure on his own party to make Obamacare the thing of the past. And Paul Ryan, the House Speaker, is pretty much okay with that.
I love the fact that he wants to get things done for the American people, and he's pushing us hard, which is what we want to see happen. The point, Brian, is this law is collapsing. It's not working. We have better ideas for how to replace it.
So now, as the Senate starts its path toward health care reform, Senator Rob Portman will play a major role in that effort. The Ohio Senator is our guest in a moment. Plus, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's a low-flying drone. 9:33, Washington, D.C., the Senate hearing about to get underway. NSA Director Michael Rogers testifying before a committee about U.S. Cyber Command. This is a big topic today and going forward. Rogers serves the dual leadership role of NSA Director and Commander of Cyber. This is the Senate continues tackling a number of issues related to cybersecurity. So keep an eye on that. We'll let you know what we learned. Headlines coming up from D.C. 9:33 now. Shannon.
I did call Mitch McConnell and said, the ball's in your court now. We're excited to get working with you guys. They were already preparing a plan, meaning a group to get this processed over there, because we made a promise. We made a promise to the people who sent us to Congress that we would repeal and replace this failing law with patient-centered health care to get lower premiums, lower prices. And yes, we have multiple ways of making sure that a person with a pre-existing condition, with a catastrophic illness, gets affordable coverage.
House Speaker Paul Ryan defending the House health care bill as the battle over replacing Obamacare now shifts to the Senate. Republican senators are warning their bill is going to be very different from the House version and that the process, well, it could take a lot longer as well. Joining me now, one of the key senators in this conversation, Ohio Senator Rob Portman. Thank you for joining us, Senator.
Hey, Shannon. Thanks for having me on.
All right, I want to start with a tweet just a couple of days ago from the president saying this: Republican senators will not let the American people down. Obamacare premiums and deductibles are way up. It was a lie and it is dead. Couple exclamation points in there. The speaker says he doesn't mind the pressure from the White House. How does it feel to you?
Oh, look, I think it's fine. I think there's a consensus among not just Republicans, but Republicans and Democrats that the law is not working. And even if Hillary Clinton had been elected and there had been a Democratic Senate, we'd have to be fixing the failing Affordable Care Act. Obamacare hasn't worked. Premiums have skyrocketed. So have deductibles. So have copays. And there's a lack of competition. In my own state of Ohio, about a third of our counties now only have one insurer in the private market. And in many states, it's even worse. So this thing is collapsing of its own weight. However, the Senate is going to take a look at this legislation that the House sent over and put our own imprint on it, and that means improving it in certain ways. In my own state, we have a big concern over the expanded Medicaid population, because given particularly the opioid issue, the addiction, heroin, prescription drugs, now fentanyl, this is the first payer. It's the largest payer. About 50% of the cost of expanded Medicaid in Ohio is being used simply for substance abuse and mental health treatment. So we've got to be sure we aren't pulling the rug out from under those folks, and I think we can do that.
I know it's a big sticking point for senators on both sides of the aisle, the idea of that Medicaid expansion and how it does or doesn't continue, in what form. Another big issue are those state waivers that were tucked into the House bill that allow states flexibility with doing away with some of the mandates. If they can satisfy certain requirements in getting that waiver, at least one conservative health policy analyst says the likelihood of those surviving in the Senate version is very low. What other troublesome issues do you see with the House bill that may not work in the Senate, where you've got to craft a different kind of coalition?
Well, it's interesting. I think many of us in the Senate are actually looking for more flexibility to the states to be able to design the plans, to be able to come up with creative ways, including managed care, to cover people who are not currently covered. So, in a way, the Senate's going to provide more flexibility, I believe. But in other ways, you're right, with regard to pre-existing conditions, a lot of us have a concern. We want to be able to assure our constituents that if a person has an illness that is catastrophic or an illness that is something that would not permit them to get insurance because of that pre-existing condition, that they can get coverage. And so we want to make sure that that works. And there's discussion about taking the risk pools and changing those a bit and other ideas. But I think it's an interesting situation for him because we might provide more flexibility to the states to be able to design plans because we know that over time that's going to result in better health care, that the government closer to the people is going to be helping to find out what works in that state to cover more people.
Bottom line, you talk about the failures, and a number of Republicans have cited these states and counties where people are left with little to no options across the board. Even Democrats, some of them have acknowledged there are fixes that need to be done to the ACA. Can you actually craft something that's going to make a difference in the lives of real Americans who are trying to go to the doctor, trying to get coverage, no matter what their health issue is, pre-existing or something new or a catastrophic injury? And if so, is it something that will actually pass the House where you know special provisions were cobbled together so that they could get the votes they needed?
Yeah. Shannon, I think that's a great question, and I think the answer is absolutely yes, we can do better. I mean, there's no question about it. And again, Democrats in a private moment and Republicans here on the Senate side all agree with that this system is not working as intended. It's certainly not covering the number of people it was intended. The costs have skyrocketed. You recall the costs were supposed to go down. They've gone up instead. Instead of being down $2,500, which was projected by President Obama, they've gone up by about $4,600 per family. 91% increase in Ohio in the individual market, a cost increase, 82% increase for small businesses. So this thing is not working as intended, and people haven't had the choice that they were promised. So people have lost their plan and lost their doctor. So I think we can do better by taking what the House has passed, improving it in certain ways, being sure that we aren't pulling the rug out from under people who are currently getting coverage, and at the end of the day, over time, begin to see these premiums and these copays and these deductibles level off and not continue to rise. This is the biggest problem we've got really in our economy, too, is that wages are flat and yet expenses are up, and the number one increased cost is health care.
Yeah, and a lot of uncertainty. Just yes or no, because we're out of time. Do you predict you'll get any Democratic votes in the Senate?
You know, too early to tell. I talked to one colleague yesterday, and I can't say yes or no because he can't say yes or no yet. It depends what's in it, but we're going to have to do it primarily with Republican votes, I'm afraid.
Of course. All right, Senator Rob Portman, part of that group of 12, the working group now that has a big task ahead. Thank you, sir, for your time.
Thanks, Shannon. Appreciate you.
Might get one, maybe two. Maybe not.
Might need them both.
Right. Scary moment for a cyclist caught on camera. Check it out, Northern California. This is brutal. A drone crashing into a racer.
Ouch.
Sent him over his handlebars at about 30 miles an hour. He was not seriously injured, but this is quite a tumble. Now get this. The drone's owner came forward, offering to buy that cyclist a new bicycle.
Can he also offer to win the race for him?
Yeah.
Because it's a lot of training to get knocked off your bike. I mean,
and a new helmet and
ouch.
everything else that goes with it. I mean, that's a tough tumble.
It is, but classy of the owner to own up to it, the drone owner, and to come up and try to make things right. We need more personal
responsibility. Did the drone hit him, or did the drone land in front of his bike?
It looks like it might have gotten into his wheel area. So I don't
spokes?
know. The spokes, as it were.
Drones on spokes.
Either way, not good.
So Northern California, he's going to be okay, but wow, what a piece of...
Anyway, if you start a band, I like that. Drones on spokes.
Drones on
okay. Coming up next, the White House weighing military options in the fight against terror. Will more U.S. troops be sent over to Afghanistan?
Good question. Also, Sally Yates, James Clapper answering questions on Russian meddling in our election. The chair of that hearing, Senator Chuck Grassley, on what he learned after 5 hours of testimony.
Did anybody ever make a request to unmask the conversation between the Russian ambassador and Mr. Flynn?
And again, Senator, I can't answer a question like that
Mr.
that
Clapper,
would call
do you
for
know if
classified
that was
information.
the case?
I don't.
Is there a way to find that out? The bottom line here is I want to know how it got to the Washington Post. Somebody had to have access to the information, and they gave it to the Washington Post. Is that a fair statement?
That's right. That's what it looks like to me.
Is that right, General Clapper?
Yes.
And it was neither one of you did it.
That's right.
That's right.
How many people can request unmasking of an American citizen in our government, General Clapper? How many?
I don't have an exact number. It's
I think, fairly limited because it's normally fairly high-level officials.
So that came right near the end of this hearing. Former acting AG Sally Yates, former DNI head James Clapper saying they had no part in revealing those names and don't know who did. This is Clapper stands by his assertion that there was no evidence of collusion between Moscow and the Trump team. Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, with me now. And Senator, how's it going today? And good morning to you.
Good morning, and I think you made two important points that I was prepared to make, so I won't repeat them. You just stated them.
All right, well, I didn't mean to beat you to the punch, but I'll go ahead and phrase my first question for you. What'd you learn yesterday?
Well, when it comes to the unmasking, that we can find out who allowed the unmasking, that may lead to people that committed the felony of releasing it to the press so it was in the Washington Post. But the most important thing out of all this is the people need to know that by violating the law and releasing classified information, it alerted the Russians to the fact that we were one of the ways in which we tracked their communications so that they can take action so that we lose that source of information on the Russians in the future. And that's a detriment to our national security. One of our tools is less valuable than it previously was.
The president was tweeting on this yesterday. I'm going to share two of them with our audience, okay? But I'm going to do one at a time and get you to respond directly to the points he's making, okay? This is number one. Director Clapper reiterated what everybody, including the fake media, already knows. There is no evidence of collusion with Russia and Trump. Okay, come out, Senator, and answer that. True or not? No collusion?
That's true, except I don't like to respond to what's called fake news. It's news. And it's an analysis that's accurate because that Clapper made that very clear in public, but I'd also heard him make that clear in a classified briefing.
Okay, you may not want to answer this one then, all right? Another tweet, put it on screen. Sally Yates made the fake media extremely unhappy today. She said nothing but old news. Get past the fake media comment there. Was it old news yesterday, Senator?
I think step by step going through the 4 or 5 times he had conversations with people at the White House, as far as I'm concerned, that is new news, but it's not really, those details are new, but it might not be anything new in the outcome.
Okay, I understand that. When it comes to surveillance and revealing the names of American citizens, that the law was set up to protect, basically. Do you believe there has been a violation of that law as you look at this issue today?
I don't know yet, but it's something that Senator Graham and I are going to pursue, and I assume Senator Whitehouse, as ranking Democrat of the subcommittee, would want to pursue it because when those things happen, then we need to know a violation of law, and we want to make sure that Americans are protected with their constitutional right of privacy, and we want to make sure that when there is an unmasking, that it's for a legitimate purpose, and most importantly, not for political purposes. But you can understand, and Susan Rice may be the answer to this if she appears before our committee, that the purpose of the unmasking and what she knew about it, because if it was used for political purposes, that's absolutely wrong.
Do you think Susan Rice is hiding from your committee and your questions?
I don't know whether she's been formally asked to come yet by Senator Graham. If she has and turned it down, then I would make that accusation. But right now, I don't know exactly where it is in the invite status.
Okay, now, but last question here. You know someone had to tell a reporter at the Washington Post about Flynn's name. Otherwise, they don't get his name. And it's not in the story. And it does not appear in print. Correct?
Correct.
So it came from someone. How long is that list, Senator? How many people possible?
Well, you heard what Clapper said on that in answer to Senator Graham. that it's a pretty limited list. He didn't give the exact number, and we don't know the exact number, but it ought to be a finite number, and we can find that out.
Yeah, understood. Is it half a dozen? Is it a dozen? Is it 2 dozen? Give us an idea.
I have no basis for saying if it's 10 or 50. It's a limited number, high up in an organization. We ought to be able to isolate it, and then when you isolate it, you ought to be able to find out who released it.
All right, Senator, good luck finding that one out. Appreciate your time today. Thank you very much.
Right, goodbye.
Chuck Grassley, the Republican from Iowa. We'll talk again. Thanks, Shannon.
Well, delays, cancellations, it's all part of flying these days, but check out these passengers not having it. Yowza! That skirmish broke out in Florida after Spirit Airlines nixed several flights. So now, the blame game.
Very tense, very angry people. Everybody had places to be and couldn't be there.